The Ghosts of Chillingham Castle, a story from Northumberland. October 1992, Chillingham Castle, Northumberland, England. Emma had heard about the horrors of Chillingham Castle her whole life growing up near Alnwick. She knew the stories of the castle's gruesome history, its dungeons and the infamous torture chamber. Chillingham had served as a strategic stronghold during the Anglo-Scottish Wars and was renowned for the brutal treatment of its prisoners, but it was the castle's alleged hauntings that drew her in. When Emma took a position as a tour guide at Chillingham, she thought it was just a job. Yet, as Halloween approached, she felt an inexplicable unease whenever she walked through the castle's stone halls. The shadows seemed darker, and every step seemed to echo with the pain of past centuries. Her fellow guides warned her about certain rooms, especially the dungeon and the chapel. They told her of the Blue Boy, a ghostly child who appeared at night, his face frozen in agony, and the White Pantry Ghost, a spirit of a tormented woman who roamed the kitchen areas in search of water. Emma tried to brush these stories off as exaggerated tales meant to frighten tourists, but everything changed one dark October night when she was assigned to lock up the castle alone. The day had been damp and overcast, and by nightfall the mist had settled thick over the grounds. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of wind filtering through the ancient stone walls. Emma moved quickly through the main hall, locking doors and checking the windows. The silence was unnerving, and as she passed through the chapel, she noticed a cold draught, so sharp it felt like an icy hand brushing against her arm. Shrugging it off, she continued down the corridor toward the Edward Room, where King Edward the First was said to have stayed during one of his visits. As she entered, she felt an immediate sense of dread, a weight pressing down on her chest. The room was icy, colder than the rest of the castle, and she noticed the air was heavy, as if filled with sorrow. Turning, she saw a faint shimmer in the corner of the room. She squinted, thinking it might have been a trick of the light, but as she focused, she saw the outline of a small boy. He was dressed in a simple tunic, his face pale and contorted in a look of pure terror. His skin had a faint blue hue, and his hands were clenched tightly, as if trying to protect himself from something unseen. Emma froze, a scream catching in her throat. The boy's mouth opened, but no sound came out, only a hollow, agonized silence. He lifted his eyes to hers, pleading, as if begging her to save him from some unimaginable torment. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone, leaving only the bone-chilling cold behind. Emma fled from the room, her heart racing, but the night was far from over. She had barely composed herself when she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the direction of the dungeon. The sound was low and insistent, like nails dragging across stone, accompanied by the distant echo of what sounded like muffled screams. She hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but curiosity drew her toward the source. She made her way down the narrow staircase to the dungeon, where so many prisoners had met a slow, torturous death. The room was small and dimly lit, the walls thick with age and oppressive memory of suffering. As she stood there, the room seemed to grow darker, and she felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. She turned to leave, but something stopped her. A low, whispering voice, barely audible, coming from the far corner of the dungeon. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was pleading, filled with despair. Then, out of the shadows, she saw a shape begin to take form. It was a man, or what was left of him, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow and vacant, his limbs twisted and broken. He reached out a skeletal hand, his fingers trembling as if in pain, and Emma felt an overwhelming urge to run. As she backed towards the door, the figure's mouth opened in a silent scream, his face a mask of agony. She could feel the desperation radiating from him, a soul trapped in eternal torment, reliving his death again and again. And in that moment she knew this was one of the castle's many victims, condemned to haunt these halls for eternity. She fled the dungeon, stumbling up the stairs and out into the corridor, her pulse pounding. The stone walls seemed to close in around her, and she could hear footsteps behind her, slow and heavy, as if someone were following her. But no one was there. By the time Emma reached the white pantry, she was trembling, desperate to escape. As she caught her breath, she heard a faint voice, hoarse and pleading, coming from within the pantry. It was a woman's voice, begging for water. Her words were soft, barely more than a whisper, but the desperation in her tone was unmistakable. Emma knew the legend well. The White Pantry ghost was said to be the spirit of a woman who had been poisoned and, in her final moments, had begged for water to ease her suffering. Now she wandered the castle in search of what she had been denied. Slowly, Emma approached the pantry, her heart pounding. She saw a figure, a woman in white, hunched over as if in pain. The woman's eyes were sunken, her skin pale and translucent, her face twisted in sorrow. "Please, water," the ghostly figure murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Emma felt a strange compulsion to help, but as she reached out, the woman's face contorted into a look of fury, her eyes blazing with anger and despair. In a flash, the figure lunged towards her, disappearing just before reaching her, leaving Emma alone in the dark pantry. Emma never spoke of that night to anyone. She left her position at Chillingham Castle shortly after, unable to shake the images of the blue boy, the tortured prisoner, and the vengeful woman in white. To this day, visitors to Chillingham report similar experiences: icy draughts, whispers from empty rooms, ghostly apparitions, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. For those who dare to explore the castle after dark, the spirits of Chillingham are never far. They are the souls who have suffered, who met brutal, violent ends within these ancient walls, and who seem condemned to relive their suffering for eternity. And for those who come seeking the paranormal, there is a warning that echoes through the corridors. Chillingham's ghosts are not mere stories. They are as real as the stones that make up the castle itself, and they never let their visitors forget.